Okay. My phone is filled with memory, so I was trying to quickly delete some videos, but we'll see how long it lasts. I may have to use your phone once it runs out.
Your memory is full, and it's full of memories.
Exactly. Okay, chapter 14. Been making some very good progress here. This is will be our last class of this session. We've covered a lot of important ground in the definition of the Beinoni. So the Beinoni in the previous chapters, it's the most important word to familiarize ourselves with in the Tanya when we study the Tanya. And that's really the goal of the Tanya, is to set out to define the meaning of the Beinoni. The literal meaning of the Beinoni is the in-betweener, the one in between the tzaddik, and the one in between, which is the righteous person, and the one in between the rasha, the evil, the wicked person. And we explain early on that it can't be that he's 50-50, 50 good, 50 bad, because we said anyone that has even slightly sinful behavior, they're considered in the category of a rasha, where they allow their animal soul that's within them, their animal consciousness within them, to have a say. The tzaddik, on the other hand, he's the perfect person. He doesn't allow the animal soul to have any say. In fact, there is no animal soul. He's either transformed it or totally minimized the existence of the animal soul within him. So where does this leave the Beinoni? What is he in between? In between what? Either if you're perfectly good, you're a tzaddik. If you have any bad within you, you're considered a rasha. So where does the Beinoni, where does he find himself, the one that's in between? So we said we have to understand what it means to be in between in this sense. That on the surface, he looks completely to be like a tzaddik, to be righteous, because in his behavior, he is perfect, or she is perfect. Behaviorally, primarily your three garments. The three garments are?
Thought, speech, and action.
Thought, speech, and action. So you can choose, and the Beinoni does choose every time, to not allow the animal soul, the animalistic consciousness within him, to find any expression, behaviorally and active thought. What he chooses to actively think about, what he says, and what he does. So on the outside, he looks exactly like a tzaddik, because a tzaddik also is perfect in his behavior. But on the inside, it's a whole different story. On the inside, the animal soul is raging within. There are lusts, there are drives towards physical things. The animal soul is very much present within him. He hasn't quieted the desire of the animal soul. So on the inside, he actually looks to be the same as the rasha, the wicked person. And that's what we mean in between. In the inside, he looks to be exactly like the rasha. He's got that inner battle going on within his godly soul and his animal soul, his godly consciousness and his animalistic consciousness. But he doesn't allow it to express itself behaviorally, and therefore on the outside, he looks to be like a tzaddik. And that's what the Beinoni is. He's in between in that sense. So now in chapter 14, the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, he continues discussing this unique personality of the Beinoni, and he opens the chapter with this very important statement. And he defines this. He waits till chapter 14, now that we understand what the tzaddik is, now that we understand what the rasha is and who the rasha is, and now that we've begun to understand who and what the Beinoni is, now finally he says this. Vihine, I'll read it in the Hebrew and translate. Midas ha-Beinoni hi midas kol adam va'achareha kol adam yimshoch. Now this rank, this level of the Beinoni is one that is attainable to every person. Each person should strive after it, and if he or she has not yet attained it, they should not think it's beyond their reach. So he's establishing here this important statement that what is the goal of each and every one of us, and what can be the goal of each and every one of us, to be a Beinoni. Everything that's been discussed and said in the previous chapters concerning the Beinoni is not something, even though some of the ideas seem to be applicable to great people, to remarkable individuals. The Alter Rebbe says, the author here in the Tanya says in chapter 14, It is not something that's applicable only to a select few individuals. Rather, it's a very reasonable mission and goal for everyone. The rank of the Beinoni, the in-between, the perspective, the life, the behavior, the daily lifestyle of this Beinoni is something that relates to each and every one of us. Every person can be a Beinoni. Every person can be and therefore should strive to be like this individual, like the Beinoni. This is the goal. This is the mission statement that relates to every person in his or her individual life. As the Alter Rebbe explains, Shekol Adam. Every person, Yachol Liot Beinoni B'kol Et U'B'kol Sha'a. Every person can be at any time or at any hour a Beinoni. At any moment of your life, at every fork in the road, before every experience, at every hour, at every second of a person's life, he or she can become a Beinoni. B'kol Et U'B'kol Sha'a. Wherever you're standing in life at this particular moment, you can be a Beinoni. Why? And here he reminds us again of the Beinoni's inner makeup, because the Beinoni in the inside, he's like every one of us. Ki ha-Beinoni eino ma'us b'ra'a. The Beinoni is not disgusted by evil, is not turned off by the inner struggle and the inner battle. In fact, he's very much living that. Unlike the tzaddik, the perfect righteous individual, the Beinoni doesn't find worldly pleasures to be revolting, to be loathsome, to be disgusting, to be lowly. He doesn't abhor evil. He's not disgusted by it. So in this sense, the Beinoni is like the ordinary man. He's the everyday person who has a pull towards negativity, a pull towards physicality. This is not eradicated, totally removed from his life. Physical pleasure and even evil temptation and drives can be very tempting and very desirable for the Beinoni. Now the tzaddik, he's morally perfected. Not only externally, not only in the outside as we know, but also internally. So he's rid himself of his egotistical soul, the inner behemoth, the animalistic soul. And therefore, he is disgusted by evil behavior and loathsome behavior. He doesn't have that battle. He doesn't have those inner feelings and temptation. The Beinoni, however, is not ma'us b'ra. He's not disgusted and loathed and finds evil loathsome. Rather, Beinoni, we say about him that the task of the Beinoni is only to turn away from evil and to do what is good in actual practice of deed, speech, and thought. In these manners, continues the Alter Rebbe, every person is given the choice, the ability, and the freedom to act, speak, and think even that which is contrary to the desire of his heart and diametrically opposed to it. So if anyone here is going to tell me I can't be the Beinoni because I have a pull towards doing something that's not permissible or that's not aligned with God, with Torah, with mitzvos. No, the Beinoni also has that same pull and desire, except he chooses, using his mind, he chooses not to allow it to find any manifestation in thought, speech, and action. In the matters of behavior, practical behavior, as opposed to internal emotional matters of the heart, every man is given the choice, and every woman is given the choice, the ability, and the freedom to act, to speak, and to think, even that which is contrary to what they want to act, speak, and think about. Every human being, no matter who they are, as long as they're a healthy person, no matter the situation in which any particular person stands, where they find themselves, no matter their background, their affiliation, their state of mind, their struggle, their challenge they're going through, has the full choice and the control not to behave in a manner that implements and manifests his animalistic cravings and temptations that come from the heart. So we're not saying to rid yourself of those cravings. We're not saying that the Beinoni does rid himself of those cravings. He chooses not to express it. So to tell a human being, to tell any one of you, if I were to sit and tell you that this is easy, or that you could, it's a simple task, that I cannot say. But the Beinoni is not someone who rids himself of this temptation, of the inner struggle. There's someone who, in his behavior, doesn't allow these inner voices to dictate who he is. He's not enslaved to them. His heart might crave it, be pulled towards it, but nowhere is there a rule that says that a person has to take these feelings and these cravings and to bring it to fruition, to act upon it, to indulge in it. You have a choice to disregard it, and you could ignore it. And I think we all know that to be the case. For every person, he says, Yachol hitgaber ulasiach da'ato mimena legamri, at that very moment, when the heart is on fire with passion and temptation, he can overcome this desire and divert his attention from it altogether. He doesn't need to allow it to be the master over his life, to be the boss over his life, to dictate its terms. No, a person can control themselves. And this is the power of the Beinoni. This is the unique profile of the Beinoni. The Beinoni has two souls, has two drives. And as a result of these two souls, there's this inner conflict, this inner dichotomy, there's a struggle. And there's two forces pulling him in two directions. And therefore, it's very possible, in fact, it's inevitable that you're going to experience a negative, animalistic, mundane, physical craving, whatever that may be. A person's animal soul can be more refined or a little less refined. The cravings could range from being very ugly to being less ugly. But whatever these cravings may be, the Beinoni, the person, can control it. So the question is, this is easier said than done. It seems to be easier said than done. What happens when a powerful craving arrives? What's the process that the Beinoni goes through in that moment? Because that current drive or desire that you're feeling, it's not just quietly offering a suggestion, like, hey, maybe we should consider doing this or that, this lustful thing or this pleasurable thing. No, it's inside of you, and it's screaming the top of its lungs, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm feeling. This is who we are. This is my identity. It's not as if it's like this separate person outside of you that's making this gentle request, and you can simply respond yes or no. Like, hey, a knock on the door. Do you want to come with me and do something that's really, really bad? You're like, I don't want to do that right now. It's you. It is within you. It's what you want right now. It's what you feel right now. So where does the Beinoni find the strength to remain firm? How does he resist something that feels so powerful, that feels so immediate and so personal in the moment? Because when you're sitting around in a class discussing these ideas, they all make sense. If I tell you, you all have a choice when you leave this class, what you're going to respond the next time someone says something negative to you, you have a choice to make. And you'll say, I believe that. When you go to the store and you shop for that next food that you're going to purchase, you have a choice to buy that with the kosher symbol. I think you will all agree that you have that choice. The question is, in the moment, how do you work through the feeling when you have this deep urge of the animal soul that's pulling you in that direction? How does the Beinoni find that strength in that moment to allow himself to stay in control? And that's a big question. And that's what the Alter Rebbe dedicates a good portion of this chapter, in chapter 14. He's going to continue to develop this theme throughout the time, chapters 18, chapters 25. It's a very important idea and meditation and reflection that he gives us. But he gives us here the Beinoni's method, his inner thought process that enables him to remain in control. The Beinoni, he says, turns to himself or herself, or in the language of the Tanya, he actually speaks directly to his heart. And he says like this, Eineni rotzeh liot muvdal v'nifrad chas v'shalom Hashem. Under no circumstance do I want to be separated and severed, God forbid, from the one God, as it is written, your iniquities, your sin, separate you from God. So the Beinoni tells himself like this, I don't want to be a Rasha. I don't want to be that evil person. I don't want to be someone that distances himself from Hashem, from God. I want to remain connected to him. I want to remain connected to God at all times. And the Beinoni understands this important point, that sin, and maybe an uncomfortable point, but one that we have to have a conversation about, which is that sin is contrary to the Ratzon Elyon, to the will of God. And therefore, at that moment, it places a person in a state of separation and disconnection to a certain extent from God. And we're talking here obviously about a person doing it with intent. The desire, the Beinoni's desire for connection with God is not something foreign that a person has to artificially create. It comes from deep within the person. It's called ahava misuteres. It's a Kabbalistic idea that every single Jew has within himself or herself a hidden love for God that exists within the heart of each and every one of us. It's a central idea discussed in the Tanya that every single Jew, because of the soul that they have, has an innate, natural love for Hashem. That's actually the deepest core, the deepest truth. The essential reality of the person is their neshama, their godly soul, and therefore a love for Hashem. Now, a Jew may not always, in fact, usually does not always consciously feel this love. It might be deeply concealed beneath distractions, between habits, between desires, behaviors, years of spiritual indifference, but it's there. In fact, even for the Beinoni, this love remains hidden. It's not experienced at all times. I'm going to ask the students that have been here the previous weeks, when is the time that the Beinoni does feel that love out in the open? During prayer. Very good. During prayer, the Beinoni does perhaps feel that love come forth from the surface where he's meditating and reflecting and praying to God, talking to God. But outside of that, once he goes back into the real world, he doesn't feel that love in a conscious, active state. But it's there, and the Beinoni knows that it's there. And so the Alter Rebbe lays out this argument to prove this point that we each have a hidden love within us. We learn it from the extreme. The extreme will prove the everyday. We learn this from what we call the Kal Shebekalim, which means the weakest of the weak. This is the Jew who appears on the surface to be spiritually careless and disconnected. So take the most disconnected and Jew that exists, and that seems to be disconnected. And this may be a person that shows very little commitment and connection on the surface to Torah and to mitzvos, outwardly. And this is a person that constantly gives in to their inner temptation, their inner drives. This person lives without giving much thought to his relationship with God. Many people that are in that state, perhaps because they don't know better. This is right. This is how they were born. This is what they know. Yet throughout Jewish history, we have found that when even such Jews were confronted with a stark choice, black and white, renounce your Jewishness or separate yourself from Hashem, right? Renounce your Jewishness and separate yourself from Hashem, or give up your life. This Jew was often prepared to give up his life or her life. I'm not talking about the great scholar, the tzaddik, or the exceptionally righteous people, right? For those people, we could understand how someone who devoted a lifetime to Torah and mitzvahs can be prepared to die for these deeply held beliefs that define their entire life. But we have also seen historically, this is a historical fact, countless Jews who seem to be distant on the surface, indifferent, careless to their Judaism, their connection, suddenly demonstrate unimaginable courage to their Jewish identity, to their deepest core, when their identity was challenged. In fact, this is the case historically more often than not. That a Jew, even the careless Jew, the disconnected Jew, will sooner give up his life when he's faced with that stark choice of severing his relationship with God, renouncing his faith, his Jewishness, or giving up his life. We've witnessed this in our own time. After October 7th, Jews that were previously felt distant from Jewish life suddenly felt a profound attachment to their people, to their identity. Something deep within them was awakened. So what does this reveal? What does this prove? The Alter Rebbe says it proves a simple point, that the connection was always there. That the love was always there, even when it wasn't necessarily felt. Because where does that Jew in that moment find the strength, find the capacity to go against everything that they lived their life for, to die for this, or to sacrifice themselves for this? Suddenly at that moment, a new, novel, foreign idea and love and connection was placed within them. It's obviously their true identity, their true core, and we know this. We know whenever we're challenged, it reveals our deep connection to God. That's when it's felt at the strongest. So the Alter Rebbe proves from these extreme cases that even the Kal Shebakalim, even the weakest of the weak, more often than not, will sooner give up their life than renounce their Judaism. This proves that the love for them, their love for Hashem, was always present, except what? That it was concealed, that it was hidden. The Alter Rebbe expresses it. He says, quoted in Yiddish, a Yid vilnit und erkennet sein abgerissen von Elikos. A Jew neither wants nor is able to be separated from godliness. This isn't something a Jew learns. It's not something that a Jew chooses. We don't choose this. At the deepest level of our identity, a Jew is bound with God. And there's a point of the soul, the deepest point, where the Jew and God and Hashem are inseparable. And therefore, when someone tells a Jew, renounce your Jewishness or die, the Jew doesn't need a lengthy philosophical meditation and reflection of what they should do. Something essential is touched. And he says, in effect, he says, this is who I am. I cannot deny my very existence. I cannot deny my very essence, my very identity, my very self. And therefore, he may choose death rather than this separation. So the question is, if he possesses such a deep love for God, then why does he sin? If it's there and it comes out in these most extreme circumstances, and you're telling me it's always there, then why does he ever sin? Why does he neglect mitzvot? Why does this love not govern him or her on a day-to-day in their day-to-day lives? The Alter Rebbe answers because as follows. He says, what was that?
Because what?
What we're going to say right now, as we're about to say.
As follows. Oh.
Because the person falsely believes or imagines that committing this particular sin will not truly affect the core of their Jewishness, and that their soul won't be separated from the God of Israel when they act in this way. The person doesn't say, I want to sever my relationship with God. There may be Jews that say that throughout our history, but that's usually not the case. Very, very rare that a Jew is going to intentionally say, I want to sever my connection with God. Instead, he convinces himself that nothing of significance is happening when I do this act. That it's only a small action. That I'm still the same Jew who I was after I do this act. And there's this external voice. It's not an internal voice. It comes from inside, but it originates from the outside. We call it a spirit of folly, a ruach shtus. That's how the Kabbalah defines it. Enters into him and minimizes the significance of this act. And it convinces him that he can violate the will of Hashem while remaining entirely unaffected and unimpacted by this behavior because it's minimal. So what does the Beinoni say? The Beinoni says, I'm not going to fall to that trap because I know that is not the case. Avalani eineni rotze liot shoteh kamohu lichbar ha'emet. But as for me, I have no desire to be such a fool, to deny this truth. What truth? First, that every single Jew possesses a deep and natural love to Hashem. And even though I don't necessarily experience it in an active way, it's there. I know that because historically, when a Jew is pressed, their deep love for Hashem will come out, will come to the fore, to the surface, proving that it was always there. But second, he knows he loves Hashem. He may not feel it, but he knows it. He knows this because even the weakest of the weak loves God. How much more so? He's not weak of the weak. He's a God-fearing Jew. And second, he knows that sin does indeed impact and affect the person. Does the prophet say, we quoted before, that avonotechem mavdilim beini ubeinechem, that the sins cause a separation between me and God. It does create distance. It's not meaningless or spiritually neutral to just go ahead and do something that is not consistent with the will of Hashem, even if it's not from the most significant sinful behaviors. And so the Beinoni tells himself, I'm not going to pretend that this action has no consequence. I know who I really am, and I know what's at stake. And this is why the Beinoni can overcome his animal soul in behavior, thought, speech, and action. He can't control the lust, the temptations, the pull, the struggle, the desire that he has, but he can control to not allow it to impact him because he understands the implications of his actions. He understands the outcome, the significance of his actions. So the cravings will remain powerful, perhaps, but he refuses to allow them to dictate his behavior. What was the example we gave a few weeks back? We have a very classic, basic example of the two people, or maybe the same person on different days, who's both of them have an alarm that rings early in the morning. Both are very tired. Both want to remain in bed. Yet one rolls over and goes back to sleep, right? Hits the snooze button. And the other immediately jumps out of bed. What's the difference? Is that the first person, you say, oh, one is more in control, one is less in control. Would you say that? We've proved that that's actually not the case. The first person simply doesn't have something that he feels is truly essential to wake up for at this moment. So therefore, he chooses not to utilize the self-control that he has. The second person knows that something important is on the line. We gave an example. Maybe it's a flight they have to catch, an important business meeting. There's an obligation that they simply can't miss. Suddenly, that person, who maybe the day before hit the snooze and the day after hit the snooze, suddenly, right, the tiredness is real, the exhaustion is real, but the awareness of what's at stake gives them the strength to overcome it. So the Beinoni lives with that awareness constantly of understanding what's at stake, understands that something is always on the line. Yet his relationship with Hashem, his integrity, his expression of his true identity is on the line. Same idea could be expressed in a different way. Every desire has a price. Every desire has a price. Imagine, let's just go through this mental exercise. Imagine that a person has a very, very deep craving towards something unhealthy, and this person is told, look, you can indulge in this desire, but it's going to cost you a certain amount of money. Would you still do it? What's now the question going to be?
It depends how much.
Depends how much. It depends how much, exactly. Now we can negotiate. But there is a number. There is a number that you're going to recognize that suddenly I'm not so excited about doing it. You know, in Chabad, there are different sheets of sponsorship levels. So sometimes someone will jump to, I want that sponsorship. And then they see on the right column what it's going to cost, and suddenly, maybe let's go for something a little less. The desire, the excitement suddenly dissipates. Imagine it was $100,000 for a simple temptation, a simple indulgence. Would you still do it? In most cases, the desire would immediately, not necessarily fade, but it would lose its power and its hold over you. You may still want it, but you want the $100,000 more, or you don't want to lose the $100,000 more. The pleasure, it's not that it's gone. It's no longer worth the price to pay. So what does this demonstrate? That even an intense desire is not absolute. It's not who you are. Oh, this is who I am. If this is what I want, therefore I should indulge. No, it's not absolute. Its strength depends on what you believe it will cost you. A person may be willing to pay for that indulgence $1, $5, right? To indulge in a desire. In yeshiva, it was always those guys that would, if you came late to class, sometimes you were given a fine, an actual monetary fine. They'd pay $1, $5 to show up late. So it was always those guys. They would sleep in the hour, They would come right into the study hall, right up to the rabbi, put $5 on his desk, and say, we have a deal. Like, they paid to sleep for an hour, $5 to get an extra hour of sleep. In their mind, it was worth it. Right? 100,000? I don't think so. So, as Moran said, what's the cost? It depends. Maybe you would pay more. Maybe you would pay a little less. But when the cost becomes too great, suddenly you discover, oh, I did have the ability to control myself. I do have the ability to control my actions, my behaviors. Then he doesn't want it that much. Right? So we tell a child all the time. A child will do things, I didn't do it on purpose. They'll do things all the time. Suddenly say, do that again, you're losing your, fill in what you're going to lose, the next big trip. Suddenly the child magically finds they have the capacity to not behave in the way that they were just behaving. Suddenly that free choice, the mind over matter that is a part of every single healthy person, suddenly it finds expression within themselves. So the Alter Rebbe is teaching us to recognize the true spiritual price of our actions. And really this can't be done, this exercise is not done when the desire presents itself. It's done here and now. We think about it now. We think about the concept of a sin, sinful behavior. We think about that it does create a distance and a separation. It severs a relationship between us and God. We meditate on that. And you know what? It does have hold over power, stay over power. There is a residual effect for the next few hours that you're on to maybe perhaps look at things a bit differently. And then you have to remind yourself of this daily. And this is a reflection that you try to have daily. A simple reflection. Thinking about the deep love, the natural love that I have for Hashem. You can't say I don't love God, therefore what do I care? You do love God. You don't feel it? Well, let's look at the Kal Shabakam, the week of the week. He doesn't feel it either. Yet he's willing to give up his life for God. You certainly have a love for God, even though it may not always be felt. That's number one. And to think about that and to recognize that. Reflect on that. 5 minutes. And then secondly, to think about, okay, so if I do have that indulgence, why should I not give into it? Because it's not worth it. Because what's at stake? That there are implications. A person may say, right, that I'm not prepared to pay $100,000 for this indulgence. But are you prepared to compromise your deepest, your most essential relationship, which is that of the relationship that you have to your Maker, to Avinu Shebashamayim, our Father in heaven? Are you prepared to place yourself even temporarily in a realm that's contrary to the will of Hashem, who gives us everything, gives us our life, our sustenance? So, had someone demanded that this Jew openly renounce Hashem, they might be prepared to give up their very life rather than comply. Yet because the daily temptation appears to be small, appears to be maybe even private because it takes place in their own home, in their own room, no one's watching, he imagines that very little is happening. But spiritually, the underlying issue is the same. Your action is either an expression or connection to Hashem, or an expression of disconnection. It either aligns you with your godly soul, with your truest core and identity, the will of Hashem, or it places you within the realm of Klipa, Sitra Achra, the other side. And the Beinoni simply asks himself this question. He says, does it pay? Is it really worth it? Is this brief gratification worth what I'm giving up? You know, most of the time you look at if there's like your second time around the buffet table, and you ask yourself, is it really worth it? Most of the time, once you indulge and you imbibe, the answer is it was not worth it. So the Beinoni, though, is challenged to ask that question before, and he recognizes that it's not. He understands that it's not. Is the momentary feeling of relief, of pleasure, promised by this desire, is it worth compromising my connection to God and betraying my deepest self? And the answer he comes to, the conclusion that he comes to, is no. Now the desire might still remain, the heart might still continue to burn. The Beinoni doesn't give that up. He doesn't transform these cravings. He doesn't stop wanting it, but he's uncovered something deeper. He's uncovered something more powerful than the craving. he's uncovered the truth of who he is. It's hard to compete with. Yeah. It's okay. There's a story of the Baal Shem Tov. A Jew is in, I think he's in the study house or in the shul, and he's very upset at another person there. And in a moment of anger, he says, if only I can rip you apart like a fish. That's what he says. If I can tear you apart like a fish. He's very upset. The Baal Shem Tov hears this, and he asks everyone that was still there in the study house to come around and to place their arms over each other. And they place their arms over each other. He tells them to close their eyes. They close their eyes, and suddenly they turn pale and they start to shout. In that moment, when they closed their eyes, they saw an actual image of this Jew tearing the other person apart, limb by limb. And at that moment, they realized like what that actually means. Is right. You say you want to tear you apart. On the surface, we don't always see what happens. So he's saying like, is this what you really want? And obviously that Jew felt very ashamed for what he said. When we do certain behavior between us and our Maker, us and Hashem, we don't really recognize, or we convince ourselves it's no big deal. It's not tearing us and ripping us apart from this deep connection that we have, but there is a level on which that does happen. That when a person engages with his animal soul, he becomes more connected with the clip of the other side that opposes godliness. So he is, in a sense, ripping himself away. He doesn't see it. So sometimes we close our eyes and think about what it means. Think about our behavior, the consequences, and actually envision, right, the pulling apart that it does and how painful that is for our soul when we make those decisions. And look, we're not always going to be able to be in the driver's seat to make the right choice. But he's inspiring us and telling us we can, for the next choice that we make, we can be in control if we think about these ideas.
Rabbi, so in law they say that ignorance is no defense, right? And so
in Judaism, ignorance is a defense.
It is a defense. That's
Yes.
where I was going to go.
Yes.
Because I feel like there's so much.
That's why you, by you coming to the Tanya class, you can no longer plead ignorance.
Well, of some things, right? But obviously
Correct.
there's more that, and this is of course why we study, right? But
Right.
This is I
Right.
think
So the way,
that's
so
challenge,
that, right. This always comes back to the idea of, okay, so what is this demanding of me that I'm supposed to overnight become the Beinoni in the perfect sense?
Right.
And the Alter Rebbe is never, as we're going to get through in time. And first of all, he's now setting up the ideal. He's telling us what we can do, right? But he also does tell us about the animal soul and the temptations and that which we don't know and the difficulties. So it's inspiring us to behave a little bit more like the Beinoni. A little bit more like the Beinoni. Is that if I have an opportunity today to do one more mitzvah that I wasn't going to do one less thing that I know is sinful. If I don't know, I don't know. If I encourage myself to grow a little bit, then if I look at you in a year from now, if I look at you in 2 years now, we're going to see a change. It doesn't have to be overnight. He's not expecting it to be overnight, right? But take one step in that direction of the Beinoni. Know that you can do it. That's the first thing. You have to know two things. You have to know that you have the ability to control your behavior. That's the first thing. And then you have to understand the importance of controlling your behavior. He's laying out both of these ideas in these last few chapters. One is telling us we do have self-control. It's part of the natural makeup of a human being. We have self-control. And in this chapter, he's telling us why we should have self-control. Because if we understand the implications, if we understand what's on the line, we'll recognize that there's no such thing as a small sin. There's no such thing as, I did something that was a little bit bad. In terms of it not having any outcome, negative outcome. Hashem doesn't want a person to spend their life living from the surface, which is the connection only connected to the animal soul, from the shell of their personality, responding automatically to each urge of the animal soul, right? Where does that take a person? Right? Today their urge is one thing, but where does that lead a person? He wants the person to dig a little bit deeper. Live with your godly soul. Live with the part of yourself that's eternally connected to Hashem, that is my true core and identity. That is an entirely different life. That's your essence and that's your truth. And so the power of the Beinoni is not that he never experiences temptation, once again. His power is that even in the place of temptation, he remembers who he is, he recognizes what is truly at stake, and he refuses to allow a passing desire to define his life and define this moment. And that's the Alter Rebbe's message, that every person can and therefore should strive to be a Beinoni. If we tell a person, never experience temptation, never experience any desire that's contrary to the divine will, can't say that. Who am I describing? A tzaddik. That's not the ordinary human condition. And that's not the role that we're on, the path that we're on. For the Beinoni, the desires burn, but the Beinoni says, fine, let the desire burn. I don't have to give in. I don't have to listen to every urge. Let me think about it and ask myself, is it worth it? Am I really ready to act against God's will, against my true self, against the connection that I would be prepared to die for? So says the Alter Rebbe, as we'll repeat this idea in the upcoming chapters, don't only die for God, wait for those extreme circumstances. How about live for God? And so he turns his attention elsewhere in that moment and he moves on. This is Moach Shalit al Halev. This is the mind rules over the heart. The key principle that the Alter Rebbe teaches us. The heart may still want it, but the desire does not have to control the person's thought, the person's words, and the person's actions. Okay, this is the first part of this section. The Alter Rebbe concludes this chapter, and we're going to come back to this point over and over again. It's this argument that he makes, this proof of recognizing the natural love we have to Hashem and learning from the weakest, that if they have a love for Hashem, they're willing to die for God. Shouldn't we recognize that we have it and live a little bit more consistent with that natural love that we have for Hashem? But now, with understanding these ideas, we can sort of tie up some loose knots. Again, we've been doing this the last few weeks. In the beginning of the chapter, we asked a number of questions. Eov says to God, prophet, he says, you created tzaddikim, righteous people, and you created Rishayim, you created wicked people. And the question is, how can that be? Whether a person behaves righteous or wicked, it depends on their choice. How can we say that that was created by God? But now we know the answer. You created tzaddikim doesn't mean that Hashem predetermines everyone's behavior. It means that certain souls are created with the unique capacity to attain the true level of a tzaddik, to transform their inner animal and nature completely towards godliness, to genuinely oppose evil. They have to still work to attain that level, but once they do, they're transformed, but they possess it. They have the spiritual potential that most souls don't. So a person may work on himself for years and discover there's a selfishness, there's a darkness, powerful temptations, drives, impulses within. And it doesn't mean he's failed. It doesn't mean she's failed. Because not everyone can become a tzaddik. You've created tzaddikim. You've created people that have the potential to be a tzaddik. And I might not be that. Not everyone can become a tzaddik. Not everyone is expected to eliminate the struggle. A person can remain, most people will remain internally divided, and nevertheless, at the same time, can still be a genuine servant to God, completely in control over their thought, speech, and action. And that's the achievement, the beautiful achievement of the Beinoni. And this is attainable to everyone. And this also explains the oath that's administered to every soul, that's given to every soul before they're born. We're told that a soul is administered the oath, Tihi tzaddik, be a tzaddik, va'al tihi rasha, and don't be a rasha. So at first glance, the second instruction seems redundant, seems unnecessary. Because if you tell someone, take an oath to be a tzaddik, what is that, by definition, what does that mean? That you're not going to be a rasha. If a person is commanded to take an oath not to be a tzaddik, surely he's not going to be a rasha. So the answer is, these are two unique instructions. The primary and absolute demand is the second part. Do not be a rasha. That even if you cannot transform your heart and rid yourself of your natural pull and desire towards selfishness, You can control how you think, speak, and act. You don't have to be a Rasha. You can turn away from evil. You can do mitzvah. You can learn Torah. You can refuse to allow the animal soul to dominate your life. That's the path of the Beinoni, and it's within every person's reach. Yet now we're left with a question that we have to address. It says every person is told to he tzaddik v'al to be rasha, to be a tzaddik and not to be a rasha.
אבל גם אם יגידו לך שזה רשע.
Yeah, but to know that you shouldn't be a tzaddik, you shouldn't be a rasha, fine. That's the role of the Beinoni, that not to be a rasha. But why is every person then told to he tzaddik, be a tzaddik, if that might not be your goal? That might not be your path in life. That's the question. He says like this. He concludes the chapter with this important point. He says, once you understand that that's not your goal, once you understand that you're not going to be a tzaddik, then it is healthy from time to time to think about the beauty of the tzaddik, think about the level of the tzaddik, and try to be inspired by that way of life. And to try to be a little bit, in a certain sense, like him. Only once you understand you're not, that your goal is not to be a Rasha, to be a Beinoni. Once you understand that, now, from time to time, not always, it's healthy, invaluable to look at the tzaddikim, to look at the great and righteous people and say, interesting, inspiring. What's their connection like? And to try to implement, to the smallest degree, a little bit of that lifestyle. This is what he says. Appreciate what the tzaddik represents, and at times try to experience, to emulate something of that higher world. A person should set aside, he says, specific times to reflect on the emptiness and the shallowness of his lifestyle, which is, there's a beauty that he's always in control, but there's the ugliness about the inner battle. And there is a certain, lowliness that he's constantly in the grind. He's not disgusted by evil and by temptation. In fact, he very much wants it. While he's saying, I'm not going to do it, he says, I really want to do it. As he's doing the right thing, he's saying, I really don't want to be doing the right thing. And so there's a certain sense of, okay, that's beautiful, but there's a shallowness there, a lowliness there, and there's a certain greatness and a beauty that the tzaddik lives with. Don't be so comfortable in the fact that you're always desiring and pulled towards physical things and indulgence. Recognize that the tzaddik, he's not comfortable with that. He is disgusted by that, and be inspired a little bit by the tzaddik's sort of disgust by that lifestyle. Don't be proud the fact that you have these deep, burning temptations. Be proud of the fact that you're in control, that you don't have to give into it, but don't be so proud and excited about, you know what I wanted to do but I didn't do. So he says from time to time, this is not a constant meditation and reflection we should have. From time to time, think about the tzaddik. Think about his connection to Hashem, his approach towards physicality and indulgence, and recognize how he views it and say it's inspiring. Hashem deeply values the service of the Beinoni. We're not saying that at all. But once in a while, we look towards the tzaddik and we appreciate the purity of his life, the holiness of his life, and learn from it. And this might not be my daily reality, but it can be used as an inspiration. And even if the Beinoni never becomes a tzaddik, the effort to emulate the tzaddik in the right times, from the right healthy approach, can have a lasting impact. And we'll highlight two of the things that he shares that it could have. Two things could happen. One of them is very practical, and the other is a possibility. It's a deep Kabbalistic idea discussed in the Zohar. The first is that habit has a tremendous power, and over time it becomes second nature. So when a person regularly reflects on the emptiness and the shallowness of his unhealthy pleasures, which is like the tzaddik, right? That the tzaddik is disgusted by evil and physical pleasures, those pleasures can perhaps gradually lose their appeal. And they become less exciting. That you may not come to despise evil with the complete and natural, abhorrence that the tzaddik has, but you can begin to see it a little bit more from the tzaddik's perspective and become a little bit less captivated by it, right? It's the same in the positive direction. By repeatedly contemplating on the greatness of Hashem and thinking about the tzaddik's connection and the beauty of the tzaddik's closeness to him, then you could train yourself to experience a greater joy in Torah and mitzvot, a deeper closeness to Hashem and connection to Hashem. And at first, these may require this path will require tremendous effort and meditation, but over time it becomes a little bit more genuine and a little bit more deeply rooted within him. The Alter Rebbe then adds the second benefit that it could have, positive outcome that it could have. He says that if we have this truly sincere effort from below, from ourselves, working and looking at the tzaddik with an inspiration as a understanding that's not who we are, but recognizing the beauty of that lifestyle, that we can be blessed with an assistance from above. Through our continued striving, the Beinoni can receive this like pack of energy, like a backup power, like a battery pack that is added on to him, which comes from the tzaddikim. So there's sort of, he discussed again, it's a Kabbalistic idea. In Kabbalah calls it ibor. Ibor actually means to be pregnant. You can become impregnated with something that's, well, not impregnated physically, spiritually, that your soul becomes sort of impregnated with this residual energy from the soul of a tzaddik.
You get more power.
And you get more power, and it doesn't replace your own soul, because you can't become this person's potential is not to be a tzaddik, but it can strengthen it and enable you to experience a deeply more authentic joy that you would not have reached on your own. And it's not a usual outcome, but it does exist. And it can exist even temporarily. So why sometimes does a person really feel on fire and certain temptations and desires don't have a hold on him? It could be after a really deep connection to Hashem, right? Perhaps in a sense we experience this after the high holidays, after Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, right? What's that residual inspiration that we have where suddenly right after Yom Kippur we're not filled with the same indulgence that we could be on a regular random Tuesday afternoon, Wednesday afternoon, or Thursday afternoon? Is that there's this residual strength and energy that comes to us from the souls of the tzaddikim that becomes invested within us temporarily, and sometimes it can be more, less temporary, a little bit more residual. And in this way, he says, the charge to every one of us to be tzaddik, to be a tzaddik, is not meaningless, even for someone who's on the path of the Beinoni, and not that of a tzaddik. Your effort can help you refine your desires, to reshape your emotional world, and perhaps even allow yourself to taste something of the tzaddik's experience. It's actually a very important idea, is that in a society that looks up to great people, even people that they can't necessarily attain those levels, in a society that looks up to Abraham as a benchmark, as greatness, in a society that looks up to Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses as being someone that's great, it elevates the society. It's a very important idea. Societies that look towards people that are lower than them, right? In America, it's very common. We look at, children can look at athletes or even singers or Hollywood. They know they're never going to become that, but they look at that. What does that do? It pulls you in that direction. In a society that has the opposite, they have the upward approach towards those people which are greater than them, even though you may not become like them. You're not going to become a Moshe and an Abraham. But when you look up to that, it does inspire you, and it does elevate the person's life, and it does elevate that people as a whole. And it's actually one of the explanations why Jews as a whole, why we maintain the connection, why we are able to stay elevated, is we've always looked up. We've always looked up to the great people that have come before us. And that becomes the benchmark. That becomes the inspiration. So to be tzaddik, no, that's not who you are. You're not going to be Moshe, you're not going to be Abraham. But to look and recognize the greatness of those people, it does elevate you. And it could have lasting impact. So the message, to go back to the previous idea, the clear takeaway message from chapter 14, is that every person can be a Beinoni. Will you remain a Beinoni for the rest of your life, in every moment? Unlikely. But in your next moment, when you choose to not allow your animal soul to find expression and choose to give your godly soul the voice, in that moment, you're a Beinoni. So
I'm a Bainity now, and I mean, I can be 20 times a day, I'm a Bainity, but then.
in and out.
Even millions of times a day.
It's the endless cycle. Now, the true Bainani that Tanya is describing, he remains in that status. So when he says you could be a Bainani, means you could remain in that status. Now, will we remain in that status? It's unlikely. But we can be a Bainani now. We can be a Bainani in the next 20 minutes, simply choosing to utilize our free choice to find and recognize the inner love we have for Hashem, and to live consistent with the voice of the godly soul and not the animal soul. Not someone that doesn't have temptations, not someone who doesn't have those cravings, but someone who refuses to let those temptations, those cravings, those impulses control his thought, speech, and action, or her thought, speech, and action. How does he do it? He pauses and reminds himself, he has to reflect on this point probably daily, probably more than that I do not want to separate myself from Hashem even for a moment. I want to remain connected to Him. This desire, it might promise a moment of pleasure, really feeling good, but is it worth the price? And with this, the Bainani finds the strength to turn his attention elsewhere. So he said, most of these moments, it's impulse, it disappears. So you don't have to, it's not going to be this constant battle. I mean, you'll have a next battle soon after, but that particular moment, it's in that moment. If you think it and you think through this process, this reflection, is it worth it? You find the strength to turn your attention elsewhere, to choose what's right. The desires may remain, but it no longer rules you. And with that, we'll conclude chapter 14. We'll continue, as we continue through the study of Tanya, continuing to unpack the role of the Bainani, the struggles of the Bainani, the reflections and meditations of the Bainani, and how we talked about, okay, if one of the next key ideas we're going to discuss is if you have a natural love to Hashem, if it's already there, shouldn't it be not the most difficult thing to bring it to the surface? To create something new is very difficult. But if it's already within you, I don't have to work on creating it. All I have to do is work on revealing it. Can that be done? The Alter Rebbe says it can be. And he goes through the proper meditation, reflection, very much also looking at the week of the week, the Kal Shabbat, looking at that template and using that as inspiration to try to live a little bit more with that love that's hidden, to allow it to reach the surface and to live with that love throughout your day-to-day lives. Any